Let's start with something most men completely underestimate: the hidden language of touch. Because what looks simple on the surface, what feels like just a casual everyday hug, is actually one of the most revealing forms of communication you have. And the truth is, women are not just experiencing the hug, they're reading it. Every hug you give is a transmission, not of words but of state, of intention, of identity. It's your nervous system speaking directly to hers without translation, without filters. And here's where most men get it wrong. They think the hug is about the action, but the action is just the container. The real message is in the energy you bring into it. You see, human beings are wired to detect subtle emotional cues. Long before logic kicks in, the brain is already making judgments based on body language, tension, rhythm, and presence. A woman doesn't need to consciously analyze your hug to feel whether something is off. Her body knows, instantly. And that knowing is far more powerful than anything you could say afterward. So when a man goes in for a hug distracted, uncertain, or seeking approval, that doesn't stay hidden. It leaks through micro signals: the way his arms wrap, the pressure he applies, the duration, even the way he exits. And what she feels in that moment isn't just the hug, she feels him, his confidence or lack of it, his clarity or confusion, his authenticity or performance. This is why two men can do the exact same thing on the surface and create completely different emotional responses. One hug feels warm, grounding, almost magnetic. The other feels empty, mechanical, forgettable. The difference isn't technique, it's congruence. It's presence. It's whether the man is fully there, aligned with himself, or fragmented internally. And here's the deeper layer most people never talk about. Touch bypasses intellectual defenses. Words can be filtered, interpreted, even manipulated. But physical presence? That goes straight to the emotional core. It's raw data. Which means if you're trying to get it right on the outside while feeling unsure on the inside, the hug exposes that gap immediately. Now think about what that means. In a world where people are constantly performing, curating their words, their images, their personas, a hug becomes one of the few moments where the truth slips through, where there's no script, no editing, just state meeting state. So the question isn't, did you hug her? The question is, what did she feel when you did? Did she feel certainty? Did she feel ease? Did she feel that you were grounded in yourself or reaching for validation from her? Because one creates safety and attraction. The other creates subtle tension, even if she can't explain why. And this is where awareness changes everything. The moment you understand that every physical interaction is a form of communication, you stop going through the motions. You become intentional, not in a forced, calculated way, but in a grounded, self-aware way. You realize that before you ever reach out, you need to check in with yourself. Where am I emotionally right now? Am I present? Am I centered? Or am I scattered, seeking, unsure? Because whatever that answer is, that's what you're about to communicate. And when you shift your focus from how do I do this right to what am I actually transmitting, something powerful happens. Your actions start to carry weight. Your presence becomes felt. And suddenly, even the simplest gesture, a hug, becomes something deeper, something real, something that lingers. Because at the end of the day, people may forget the words you say, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And in that brief, silent moment of connection, you're either reinforcing attraction or quietly dissolving it. So the next time you go in for a hug, don't just ask yourself what to do. Ask yourself who you're being, because that's the message she feels, and that's the one she never forgets. Now, once you begin to understand that a hug is a form of communication, not just contact, the next mistake becomes painfully obvious, and it's what I call the half-in, half-out energy problem. This is where a man shows up physically, but not fully. His body leans in, his arms wrap around her, but his presence, it's divided, hesitant, uncertain, almost as if one part of him is there and another part is holding back, second-guessing, overthinking the moment while it's happening. And here's the reality. Women feel that split instantly. Because energy doesn't lie. You can't fake certainty. You can't simulate groundedness. When you're conflicted internally, it shows up externally in subtle but powerful ways. The hug becomes lighter than it should be. The contact feels incomplete. There's a slight stiffness, a lack of rhythm, an almost imperceptible rush to get in and out before the moment has time to expose that uncertainty. And what does that communicate? It communicates doubt, not just, I'm unsure about this hug, but something deeper, I'm unsure about myself in this moment. And that's where attraction starts to quietly erode. Not in some dramatic, obvious way, but in a subtle shift in how she perceives you. Less grounded, less certain, less safe to relax into. You see, human connection thrives on certainty. Not arrogance, not force, but a calm, embodied sense of knowing. When a man is fully in the moment, when there's no internal resistance, no hesitation, his actions carry a different weight. There's a completeness to them. A sense that he's not asking for permission through his energy. He's simply expressing presence. But when you're half in, half out, you create emotional friction. It's like starting a sentence and not finishing it. Like reaching out and then pulling back at the same time. And the human brain is wired to pick up on these inconsistencies. It creates a question mark where there should be clarity, and that question mark doesn't build attraction, it interrupts it. Now here's where it gets even more important. This isn't about the hug itself. The hug is just the symptom. The real issue is internal alignment, because hesitation in that moment is rarely about the moment. It's about everything behind it, the overthinking, the need for approval, the fear of being misread, the lack of confidence in one's own intent. All of that compresses into a single interaction, and in that brief exchange it becomes visible. So when a man tries to fix this by adjusting his technique, hug tighter, hold longer, follow some external rule, it doesn't work, because the issue was never the mechanics. It was the divided state. What actually shifts the experience is when you eliminate that internal split, when your mind and body are aligned, when your intention is clear, and you're not negotiating with yourself in real time. Think about the difference between someone who walks into a room deciding as they go, and someone who already knows how they feel, who they are, and what their presence represents. That certainty translates into every movement, every interaction, even something as simple as a hug, and when you operate from that place, something interesting happens. The hug no longer feels like an action you're performing. It becomes a natural extension of your state. There's no rush, no hesitation, no overcorrection. Just a clean, grounded moment of connection, and that's what people respond to. Not perfection, but wholeness, because wholeness feels safe, it feels real, it allows the other person to relax, to trust the moment, to actually be in the interaction instead of subconsciously analyzing it. So the real question you need to ask yourself isn't, am I doing this right? It's, am I fully here, or am I holding back? Because that split, that subtle hesitation is louder than any mistake you think you're making, and once you become aware of it, you have a choice. You can continue operating from that fragmented state, hoping your actions will compensate for it. Or you can do the deeper work, align your intention, ground your presence, and show up fully, because in the end, connection doesn't respond to partial presence. It responds to certainty, and the moment you stop holding back is the moment your presence starts to be felt. Now let's go deeper into something most people completely overlook, and that's timing over technique. Because when it comes to human connection, especially something as subtle as a hug, people assume the problem is how they do it. The angle, the pressure, the duration, the mechanics. But in reality, the bigger truth is this. The wrong moment will make even the right action feel completely wrong. You can have perfect technique and still create discomfort if your timing is off. And that's where many men unknowingly sabotage themselves. They initiate touch too early, before any real emotional connection has been established. Or they do it too late, when the moment has already passed. Or even more commonly, they do it without reading the emotional temperature of the interaction at all. And women feel that mismatch immediately, because timing is not just a logistical factor, it's emotional intelligence in action. It's your ability to sense where the interaction actually is, not where you want it to be. And when that sensitivity is missing, even a simple hug can feel misplaced, forced, or disconnected from the emotional reality of the moment. Think about it like music. A note isn't good or bad in isolation. It depends on when it's played. The same note played at the right time feels powerful. The exact same note played out of rhythm feels uncomfortable. Human interaction works the same way. Timing is rhythm, and rhythm is what makes connection feel natural. Now here's the deeper layer. Many men don't wait for alignment. They rush toward validation. The hug becomes less about shared emotion and more about trying to create or force closeness. But genuine closeness doesn't come from forcing timing. It comes from recognizing it. There is a moment, subtle, almost invisible, when an interaction becomes ready. Not because you decided it is, but because both people are emotionally aligned in a shared space. There's ease, there's openness, there's a quiet sense of mutual comfort. And in that space, a hug doesn't feel like an interruption. It feels like a continuation of what's already there. But when that timing is ignored, something shifts. The body may still move forward, but the emotional context doesn't support it. And that creates friction. Not necessarily rejection, but discomfort. A sense that something didn't quite land right, even if no one can articulate why. And this is the part most men underestimate. Women are constantly reading context. Not just actions, but the emotional environment surrounding those actions. Was there rapport? Was there trust? Was there shared presence? Or was the gesture ahead of the emotional connection? Because when action outruns connection, it creates imbalance. And imbalance is what the nervous system detects as off. So what does good timing actually look like? It's not hesitation, and it's not delay, it's awareness. It's the ability to be fully present in the interaction and sense when the moment naturally invites closeness, rather than trying to manufacture it. It's a responsiveness rather than an impulse, a grounded awareness rather than a scripted behavior. And when a man operates from that level of awareness, something changes fundamentally. His actions stop feeling like attempts and start feeling like expressions. There's no sense of pushing into the moment. There's simply movement with the moment, and that's what creates ease. Because ease is what people remember, not perfection, not precision, but the feeling that nothing was forced. Now think about the opposite for a moment. A hug that arrives too early carries tension. A hug that arrives too late feels disconnected. But a hug that arrives in sync with emotional readiness feels natural, almost inevitable, like it was the only thing that could have happened in that moment. That's timing. And it's not something you can fake. You can't memorize it. You can't script it. You develop it by becoming more aware, more present, more attuned to emotional shifts, more willing to observe rather than rush, because rushing is usually not about speed, it's about insecurity. It's the need to close a gap before fully understanding it. But connection doesn't reward urgency, it rewards awareness. So the real shift happens when you stop trying to do the right thing at the right time, and instead start sensing when the moment is already right. And when you operate from that place, your presence changes. You're no longer someone trying to initiate connection. You're someone who recognizes it when it appears. And that recognition is what makes your actions feel natural, grounded, and deeply aligned with the moment itself. Because in the end, timing is not about control. It's about awareness. And awareness is what turns an ordinary interaction into something that actually feels right. Now let's go even deeper into something that quietly determines the quality of every interaction you have. And that's the difference between presence and performance, because most people don't realize this. But the moment you start trying to do it right, you've already stepped out of authenticity, and that shift is subtle, almost invisible on the surface. But internally, it changes everything. Performance is when you become self-conscious in the middle of experience. You start monitoring yourself. You start evaluating how you're coming across. You start adjusting in real time based on imagined outcomes. Is this okay? Am I being too much? Am I doing this correctly? And the moment that internal dialogue begins, you are no longer fully present in the interaction. You are split between the moment and the observation of the moment. Presence, on the other hand, is completely different. Presence is when you are no longer performing yourself. You are simply being in the experience. There is no internal commentary trying to manage the situation. There is just awareness, grounded, steady, unforced awareness. And here's the key insight. Women don't respond to your technique. They respond to your state. You can have all the right moves, all the correct behaviors, all the socially approved gestures, but if they are delivered through a lens of performance, they lose their emotional weight. Because performance always carries tension. It carries effort. It carries the invisible sense that you are trying to achieve something rather than simply expressing something. And that effort is felt. Even if it's not consciously recognized, the nervous system detects it. It picks up on incongruence, the gap between what is happening externally and what is happening internally, and that gap creates distance. Not physical distance, but emotional distance. Now contrast that with presence. Presence has no agenda. It is not trying to impress, convince, or secure an outcome. It is anchored in the moment itself. And when a man operates from that state, something powerful happens. His actions stop feeling like strategies and start feeling like expressions of who he already is. A hug in that state is no longer an attempt to get it right. It becomes a natural extension of grounded energy. There's no overthinking in the lead-up, no hesitation in the execution, and no self-judgment in the aftermath. It is clean, direct, uncomplicated. And that simplicity is exactly what makes it powerful, because human beings are deeply sensitive to authenticity. We may not always articulate it, but we can feel when someone is performing, and we can feel when someone is simply present. One creates subtle resistance, the other creates ease. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Performance is often mistaken for care. Many men believe that if they are thinking carefully about what they're doing, if they are trying to get it right, that it shows attentiveness or respect. But in reality, excessive self-monitoring pulls you out of the connection because instead of being with the other person, you are managing yourself in front of the other person. And that shift changes everything. Presence, however, is not careless. It is deeply aware. But the awareness is outward, not inward. You are not trapped in your own head. You are attuned to the interaction. You are sensing the energy, reading the moment, responding naturally rather than calculating mechanically. And when that happens, something remarkable emerges. Flow is the state where action and awareness become one. There is no delay between feeling and expression, no gap between intention and execution. Everything moves naturally, without resistance, and in that state, even something as simple as a hug carries a different emotional signature. It feels grounded, it feels real, it feels forced, and most importantly, it feels safe to receive because people don't relax around performance, they relax around presence. Now bring this back to the core mistake. When a man focuses too much on doing it right, he unknowingly shifts from connection into control. He starts trying to manage perception instead of experiencing the moment, and in doing so, he loses the very quality that creates attraction in the first place, authenticity. So the shift is not about adding more technique. It's about removing interference. It's about stepping out of self-observation and back into direct experience. Because the truth is, you don't need to perform connection. You need to be available for it. And the moment you stop trying to manage how you are being seen and start fully inhabiting how you are being, you change everything about the energy you bring into even the smallest interaction. Because in the end, presence doesn't try to create impact, it simply has it. Now let's move into something even more subtle, but incredibly powerful, and that's the idea of subtle leadership, because whether people realize it or not, every interaction carries a direction. There is always someone setting the tone, even in something as simple as a hug, and the quality of that moment is deeply influenced by whether that leadership is grounded, absent, or overcompensated. Now, when I say leadership, I'm not talking about dominance. And I'm definitely not talking about control. I'm talking about something far more refined, emotional grounding. The ability to be steady in yourself so that the other person can relax into the interaction without confusion or tension. And here's where most men unconsciously go wrong. They swing between two extremes. On one side, you have overcompensation. This is when a man tries too hard to do it right. The hug becomes overly tight, overly long, overly intentional. There's a sense of trying to prove something through physicality, as if more intensity will somehow translate into more meaning. But instead of creating connection, it creates pressure, because intensity without grounding doesn't feel safe, it feels heavy. On the other side, you have underdelivery, the quick, distracted, emotionally absent hug. It happens out of habit rather than presence. It's polite, but empty. It doesn't carry weight, but it also doesn't carry warmth. It simply passes through the moment without anchoring anything. And both extremes miss the same thing. Balance. True subtle leadership exists in the middle of those extremes, not as compromise, but as clarity. It is the ability to initiate naturally, hold confidently, and release without awkwardness. There is no tension in the action because there is no tension in the state behind it. And that's the real secret, because leadership in this context is not about what you do. It's about how settled you are while doing it. When a man is grounded, his physical presence communicates stability. There is no rush to prove, no need to compensate, no internal uncertainty spilling into the interaction, and that steadiness allows the other person to relax. Not because they are being led forcefully, but because they are being met with consistency. And consistency creates safety. Now think about what that means in human interaction. The nervous system is constantly scanning for cues. Is this safe? Is this predictable? Can I relax here? And subtle leadership answers those questions without words. It says through presence alone, you don't need to adjust, I'm steady. And that steadiness is felt in the simplest gestures. Especially touch. A grounded hug doesn't overwhelm, it doesn't disappear. It simply is. There is a calm certainty in it, no confusion, no hesitation, no performance layered on top of it. Just a clean, stable moment of contact that doesn't ask anything from the other person. And that's what makes it powerful, because people don't remember force. They don't remember exaggeration. They remember how they felt in someone's presence, and whether that presence allowed them to settle or made them subtly uneasy. Now here's where the deeper psychological layer comes in. Many men confuse leadership with intensity because intensity feels like impact, but real impact is not about how strong the action is, it's about how stable the energy behind the action remains. You can increase intensity and still lose leadership if your internal state is unstable. And you can reduce intensity while increasing presence if your internal state is grounded. That's the paradox most people miss. Subtle leadership is not about doing more. It's about interfering less. It's about removing internal noise so your actions are not distorted by insecurity, overthinking, or emotional reactivity. And when that happens, something shifts in how others experience you. They don't feel like they are being managed. They feel like they are in the presence of someone who is simply clear, and clarity is deeply attractive, not because it demands attention, but because it creates ease. Now bring this back to something as simple as a hug. If you initiate from uncertainty, it feels like you are asking for validation through touch. If you initiate from overcompensation, it feels like you are pushing energy onto the moment. But if you initiate from grounded leadership, it feels natural, almost inevitable. There's no tension to interpret, no signal to decode, just a clean, human moment of connection that doesn't leave emotional residue behind. And that's the difference, because subtle leadership is not about controlling the interaction. It's about elevating it through your own stability. And once you understand that, you stop trying to get it right in the external sense and start focusing on what is actually within your control, your internal state, because in the end, people don't follow your actions, they follow your presence. And the more grounded that presence becomes, the more naturally everything you do starts to carry weight without effort. Now we arrive at something that ties everything together, and arguably the most important principle of all, emotional congruence. Because if there is one thing that silently determines whether a moment feels real or uncomfortable, it is whether what you are expressing on the outside matches what you are experiencing on the inside. Congruence is alignment. It is the state where your thoughts, your emotions, your body language, and your intention are all pointing in the same direction. And when that alignment is present, even simple interactions feel clean, grounded, and believable. But when it's missing, people feel it immediately, even if they can't explain why. You see, most men assume that communication is about what they do, but in reality, communication is about what leaks through them. And what leaks through is always the internal state they are carrying in that moment. So imagine a situation where a man appears confident on the surface, but internally he is anxious, uncertain, or seeking approval. He goes in for a hug thinking he is being smooth, composed, or socially appropriate. But underneath that action there is tension, a slight hesitation, a subtle need for validation, and that internal contradiction doesn't stay hidden, it shows up in timing, in pressure, in duration, in how quickly he releases, in how present he actually is while the hug is happening, and the other person feels it, not as a thought, but as a sensation. Something doesn't fully land, something feels slightly off, not wrong enough to reject, but not aligned enough to deepen connection either. And that gap is what destroys emotional clarity, because humans are not just responding to behavior, they are responding to coherence. When your internal state and external expression match, the nervous system relaxes. There is no confusion to process, no contradiction to resolve. The interaction feels clean, but when there is incongruence, the nervous system does the opposite. It becomes alert, not necessarily in a conscious way, but in a subtle background awareness that something doesn't fully add up. And that's the critical point. People don't need to understand the mismatch to feel it. Now, here's where this becomes especially important in something as intimate and immediate as a hug. A hug is not filtered through language. There is no verbal buffer. There is no explanation to soften the energy. It is pure transmission, state to state, nervous system to nervous system, which means any internal inconsistency becomes instantly visible in physical form. If there is confidence in the mind but tension in the body, the hug feels rigid. If there is warmth and intention but insecurity and emotion, the hug feels uncertain. If there is desire for connection but fear of misinterpretation, the hug feels divided. And none of these contradictions need to be spoken. They are already communicated. This is why emotional congruence is not just a nice to have. It is the foundation of trust in human interaction. Because trust is not built on perfection. It is built on consistency between what is felt and what is expressed. And when that consistency is present, something remarkable happens. The interaction stops being something you are managing and starts being something you are living. There is no internal resistance, no split attention, no self-monitoring in the background, just a unified state moving through experience. And from that place, your presence becomes believable. Now think about what that means on a deeper level. Most people spend their lives trying to project an image, confidence, calmness, attractiveness, control. But projection without congruence always collapses under subtle pressure, because the body always reveals what the mind is trying to hide. So the real work is not in improving the performance, It isn't aligning the state, because when you are congruent, you don't need to think about how you are coming across. You are not managing impressions. You are not editing yourself in real time. You are simply expressing what is already true internally, and that truth has weight. Now bring this back to the simple act of a hug. If your internal state is scattered but your external behavior tries to appear composed, the hug becomes a contradiction in motion. But if your internal state is calm, grounded, and clear, then the hug becomes an extension of that clarity. There is no gap to notice, no mismatch to process, just alignment. And alignment is what creates emotional safety, because people don't feel safe around perfection. They feel safe around coherence, around people who are not splitting themselves between what they feel and what they show. So the deeper question is not, how do I do this correctly? It is, am I internally aligned with what I am expressing right now? Because the moment you become congruent, you stop needing to control the outcome. You stop overthinking the interaction, you stop adjusting yourself mid-moment, and instead, you begin to trust your presence. And that trust is felt more than anything you could ever try to perform. Because in the end, people don't respond to what you pretend to be. They respond to what you are without contradiction.